Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Claire Kaufman SDSA, and I am thrilled today to be chatting with set decorator Regina Graves SDSA and production designer François Audouy about their film, A Complete Unknown, a biographical drama from Searchlight Films, the electric true story of the most iconic singer-songwriters in history, Bob Dylan. I saw the film last night and I absolutely loved it. Congratulations to you both, and thank you for joining me today. Francois, I'm going to start with you. I know you've worked with James several times. Wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your process with him and how that varies from film to film, and what is your process of presenting your ideas and designs to James?
After you've worked many times together, you develop sort of a shorthand, but also a comfort. You're not trying to like prove yourself. A lot of times I'll pitch him one location, and probably 80% of the locations he'll like on the first go. The first go around, I just say, this is Gertie's. I think this is going to be great, and he'll be like, okay, great, let's do it. We'll do Gertie's at the Elks Club in Hoboken. But I also know from Jim the way that his sort of style and the way that he likes to work. I would call him a classical filmmaker. He's like a film Bible, in that he's just a total film nut, and he's always talking about the ins and outs of the set. He's not necessarily someone who's going to cut wide and just for no reason, which is a blessing and a curse, because we all want our big wide shot of every single set, right? But that's not, he's very much a servant to the story and to the character. So over the years and over a decade, I've learned to sort of lean into the things that I know that he likes.
Yeah, no, I imagine he's really quite something to work with. Regina, can you talk a little bit about your research for the film and how you presented your ideas to Francois? So many wonderful period details and textures to the film. I'm always interested in seeing how people interpret color when much of the research for that period is in black and white. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your process.
Well, I have to be honest with you. When I came on board, Francois was working on this movie for years, I think like 3 or even more. So he had a really great researcher on, Lauren. And when I came up, we had a vast amount of research that she had done and Francois had put together already. And like you said, a lot of it, or most of it, was in black and white. Very, very, very few photos that we had color in it. So when we were going through the research and going through the locations and the sets and building different things, Francois came up with a great color theme. Like there would be a chain of red going, working throughout all the different sets that would kind of connect them all. And we would talk about the different sets beforehand and go over color palettes for everybody. Bob was basically, all browns and grays. He was just like no color at all. Seeger House was like reds and greens and warmer tones. So we discussed things pretty much beforehand, but this was already set in Francois's mind. So like I said, it was a great starting point for me. But we talked about different fabrics and we spoke about different carpeting and paints for the walls. So it was definitely a collaboration once we got on.
Yeah, Lauren Sandoval was our researcher, and she was absolutely terrific. And we had access to all the original photography from the now famous photographers who covered Dylan during the early 1960s. So we had like 300 photos of the interior of Columbia Records, which Jim really wanted it to be as iconic and authentic as possible. So that was a complete sort of recreation of Columbia Studio A. Bob's apartment was also very authentic, but some of the other locations, there's no way you can actually do a one-to-one recreation of the village. It just doesn't exist anymore. So locations like that was more about getting into the spirit of what it must have felt like. And in terms of color, in the beginning, we looked at a lot of Kodachrome photography from the 1960s from Saul Leader and Ernst Haas and a photographer named Todd Papa George. And that was really inspiring because the way that the Kodachrome photography captures color was really interesting. And then the other thing that I would add is Regina mentioned red, and that was not something that was on my radar from the very beginning. And I guess like as I get older, I've learned to allow the film to tell me and to tell us what it wants to be in a way, and sort of be open-minded, but also like fluid. Ed Norton who plays Pete Seeger, went to go visit the Seeger cabin and Seeger's daughter and started chatting with her for his own character research. And she told him that his dad had red appliances, which we never knew because we only looked at black and white photography, to your point. We had no idea that they were red in the photographs. And she said, oh yeah. And then the running joke was that they were commie appliances, because Pete Seeger was like labeled a communist, and that was like as we see in the opening of the film. So I thought that was a great detail, speaking with Regina, and it was kind of like a late idea. She was already dressing the set, I think, when this thing came up. But I think she was like in the middle of dressing, and then we thought, we got to do it. We got to do red appliances. That's fantastic. It's going to break it up. But then I was like, Regina, we can't just have red in one scene in the movie. Like, we can't just have red appliances in the Seeger cabin and then no red anywhere else in the movie. So we started talking about how we could make red a bit of a character throughout the film, this like Kodachrome red, and what that would represent. And it ended up being a through line visually. I think it worked quite well.
Which leads me to, Regina, I wanted to ask you about the dressing of Pete Seeger's cabin, because it's so layered and wonderful. You want to tell me a little bit about your process for that set?
Well, that was a really great set. I love that cabin. And I don't know if we have any before pictures, but basically, I think, Francois chose that for the look of it. We basically stripped that whole cabin apart and put a whole new kitchen in. We built a loft above the kitchen. We had some photos of Pete Seeger's home. Again, all in black and white. And he did have a lot of layers. And speaking with Francois and how Jim likes to work, I mean, everything, we had to build this whole character background on him. And, he has 3 children. The house was built by him, by hand. So we just wanted to have a lot of layers, a lot of personality to give it background, a lot of stuff. And this was our final product.
We built out a lot of these rooms. Like we built the full kitchen. The kitchen was completely wrong. So we ripped it out. We completely demoed it and built a whole new handmade kitchen. And then covered anything that was white, we covered with wood. It was all meant to look like it was handmade. So it turned out to be a huge amount of work for being on location. And it was out by Pennsylvania. So it was, a 2-hour drive from our offices.
But there's a lot of work that you don't see that went into it. I mean, we had scenics that were basically putting the chinking in between the logs and repainting everything. And there was a lot of greens work that went on there. But the interior, like I said, we basically took most of it out. The whole kitchen was out. We built, like I said, a loft space. We wanted to see some exposed electrical. We covered the walls with the wood. I think Ed Norton went to visit the real Seeger cabin like 2 days before we were supposed to start shooting. So we wanted, we brought all that in at the last minute. So it was fun.
It was supposed to shoot, I think, on a Wednesday or Tuesday, and he came to see the set with Jim Mangold on a Sunday. And we didn't have an allowance to do chinking on the entire cabin. The house had no chinking. It was sort of a modern interpretation, or a newer interpretation of a log cabin. And Ed, who's extremely passionate, and I admire his passion, was talking about how his character had laid every log with his wife, one at a time, and that the chinking was such, if I could do it, boy, that was like such an important part of his character. And then he was like texting me photos from his family cabin, and I know what chinking is. I know, I'd love to have it. And Jim, to his credit, he was like, look, he's nodding, but we don't have a lot of time, so don't get, we'll do what we can do. And he didn't put too much pressure on me, but I put pressure on myself because the chinking was a great idea. And we pulled it off with the painters at the last minute. It was just absolutely incredible to be able to add that detail.
It really is. It's so believable and such an amazing set. Which leads me a little bit at talking about that. Timothy Chalamet's portrayal of Bob is incredible. To both of you, how involved were the actors throughout the film? You talked a little bit about Ed already. Curious about Timothy's involvement because he seems so indulged in that character.
I'll say two things about that. One is we had like the top floor of a bank building as our offices in Jersey City, and it was an open floor plan. So the art department was a completely open floor plan, going like bleeding into graphics and props and set deck, all open together.
Mhm.
And then production was on the other side, and like costumes had like 5,000 costumes. They were like the other half, and it was all connected. So the actors would come by and they would rehearse in the space and meet in the space, and we would hear them playing music in like the rehearsal room, and we're constantly like flowing through, and Regina and I had stuff all over the walls. And it was like the fact that our production office had no walls was a metaphor for like the production, which had no walls. Like Jim really believes in filmmaking that's where everyone isn't siloed, and there's like a free flow of conversation and ideas. So in talking with like Monica Barbero, who plays Joan Baez, she was very inspired by what she saw for her character on the walls coming through in the art department and the research that we shared with the costume department. Timmy, like he really wanted to see the photography from Columbia Records. Some of the photos, the different recording sessions were very well documented, and he folded some of those photos into his performance. Like Jim always says, sometimes awkward for characters to just show up on a set and be like, well, why do I have that poster on the wall? And so we tried to share as much as possible, and I would share, like we had a gigantic lookbook that I would share with Jim, and Jim would share with the characters and forward along. So I think it was a very open, transparent sort of collaborative process.
Such a great way to work. Regina, leading me into Bob's apartment. Was that a build? And where did you source a lot of that dressing for that particular set?
So it was a build. We built that on a stage in Kearny, New Jersey. And again, we had so much research from Bob's apartment down to like the floor plan and the shelving and what he had on his walls. I mean, everything. That apartment, I think out of everything we had, it's been documented so much. So we really wanted to recreate his apartment as he lived in it. A lot of the furnishings were sourced through antique stores throughout like New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. I mean, a lot of it was hand shopped because I just took so much pride in trying to find every piece that he had. My assistants found a lot of great stuff on Facebook Marketplace. I mean, it's just a mixture of different things. We had props brought in, a lot of the notebooks and a lot of his hand props. Every piece of set dressing in there was really thought about and chosen for Bob. And that's my favorite set. I just love the way it looks, love the way it came out. And the funny thing about that is Timmy actually, before we shot that, he wanted to spend some time in there, and he spent at least like an hour or so, maybe even more, just walking around the apartment, getting his feel for it all by himself. I think the day before we shot or the day of, I think it really worked. I think everyone was happy with it.
Regina and her team did such an incredible job with the space, and she's underselling it a little bit. I mean, the whole apartment was completely interactive and real, and you couldn't look off of the set. It had a backing, and we built hard scenery outside with the walls, the neighbors' walls next door. Come up the stairs, open the door. The entire kitchen was interactive and plumbed. The entire bathroom was interactive and plumbed. Every single drawer was full of dressing that you could shoot a close up on. And then there are these layers of all of the ephemera that we found in the research, down to like the stuffed animal behind him and the framed paintings that we got licenses with the original estates. I mean, it was really an extraordinary amount of detail, working closely with props, the prop department as well. But the one thing that I do want to add is that, in New York, the set decorator is in charge of a lot more in terms of the final finishes of the set, like all the tile work and the carpets and the linoleum. Like the entire kitchen was all tiled by Regina's crew with vintage subway tile that we cracked and broke away. Regina, you really brought this home. It was just like a shell when I turned it over, and I mean you added all the loving detail and made it a real place. It was just extraordinary.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it was a really fun set to dress and work on. And like I said, I think the biggest challenge was, you see these photos and you just want to bring them to life. And I wanted Bob, if Bob ever watches the film, to feel like he took a step back in time. And again, there's our red
Right. Well, I
blanket.
think
Yeah.
you will, because it is just, it's so believable. The whole film is absolutely so believable. It's so well done. Francois, there's a lot of street scenes. Regina told me you guys dressed almost 4 blocks of streets. Where did most of that take place? What kind of prep time did you have for those sets? And was most of that practical?
All of the street scenes were practical, and probably in terms of like time, the most time intensive and stressful to pull off, because you're working in the real world. As you know, when you're working in the real world, you have to work with the public, and you're working in businesses and trying not to be too invasive. And for Bob's arrival to McDougal Street, this was in like a block and a half of Jersey City that we called the hub, and it had like 4 or 5 fully dressed interiors as well as all the dressed exteriors. And it was a complete 360-degree set. And when we were working on the visual effects breakdowns for this, they never thought that this could be in camera. So there were hundreds of thousands of dollars set aside in the visual effects department to fix this. We ended up doing this completely in camera. I don't think there are any visual effects in this entire sequence of McDougal Street. And that's sort of a testament to everybody's hard work. As you know, these street scenes, especially when you're dealing with something that's 63 years ago, is extremely time intensive. And a lot of the ephemera now, it's literally disintegrating. Like with all the paper goods and everything that are rented, the paper's falling apart. It's turning to dust before your eyes. So every decade that goes by, it becomes harder and harder to do a film set during this period.
Yes, absolutely. Regina, you want to talk a little bit about this and some of the interiors that you guys dressed out for these scenes?
Yeah, so this, I have to really credit to Chuck Potter, who was one of my assistants. He really took on the exteriors, especially here in Jersey City, and that freed me up to do the interiors. But we were working around the time schedules of the different restaurants, and some of these places we had a time frame of, we have to be at the bagel shop we can dress on Monday between 12 and 2, and then Tuesday between 3 and 4. I mean, the schedules were kind of crazy. But, we had bring in a lot of different awnings and signage and a lot of set dressing to fill all of the windows. And we did fill up 2 sides of the streets, the Folklore Center, which sadly you didn't get to see the inside of, but that was fully dressed out. We had the kettle of fish, which we we had inside scenes of. We had the cafe, the Italian cafe, which the name is escaping me, which we didn't even get to see. But there were so many sets that, again, we dressed, but you didn't see either.
There's a passage of time throughout the film, particularly Columbia Studios, where Bob recorded. Can you both tell me a little bit about that set and how you guys sourced all the equipment and how that came together?
We had hundreds of photos of Columbia Records, and it was one of the few sets along with Bob's apartment, that we felt was important to recreate authentically. So Lauren did tons of research as to find out what the square footage was and what the equipment was, and we recreated the mixing board in the sound room exactly as to what it was.
Yeah, that we worked hand in hand with props. We worked very closely with props on a lot of the equipment, most of the equipment.
Then we augmented it and added onto it to make it look like the one that was in Columbia. I think the most interesting thing about Columbia is that I've never designed a set that's supposed to sound right. We usually just do the way that's supposed to look, but we don't think about things in terms of how they're supposed to sound. And all of the live music in this movie is recorded live with the real microphones. was a huge effort by the prop department to source these 60-year-old microphones or 70-year-old microphones. But Columbia was actually designed to sound like Columbia. And there were all of the baffled walls and the materials that were all real materials. We laid down a real beautiful hardwood floor. And we brought in the sound recordist to actually look at the room and mic the room and run cables to the soundboard. So all the needles were interactively working and the playback speakers had actual speakers in them. That was an interesting collaboration that I'd never done before.
Well, it's incredible because you can tell that they're really singing in the film and what a difference that makes. Regina, you want to say anything about that set?
Well, that was another great set, and we built that, like Francois said, again on stage in Kearney, and it was very interactive, and all of the equipment and the sound bafflings, everything was live, and I mean, you felt like when you walked in there, you could record your own song. But it took a lot of time to find a lot of the different items in there. And a couple of funny things is while we were in there, Jim would ask for, could we get a harp? We need a harp tomorrow. Or he wanted, an xylophone, or just like some strange musical instruments that we didn't really plan on having. So it was always a bunch of that was peppered in too. But it was a great set. We filmed a couple of days in there. And I love on film, when you're watching the movie, I didn't realize how many times we were back there. I mean, we were dressing and redressing this set for the different time periods. And the same with Bob's apartment. I mean, we did so many redresses in there. It covered so many different time periods. And that was really fun. And especially seeing it in the movie and just every scene looked different. It was rewarding.
Yeah, it's a great set. Regina, I know as a decorator, we depended upon a lot for lighting the sets with practicals. What was your interaction with the DP, Fade and Papa Michael? And what kind of discussions did you have? Did you supply a lot of the period correct lighting on camera?
We did. And Faden was really great. I love the whole dynamic between Faden, Jim, and Francois. They're like a boys club, and they've worked so many times and so well together that, like you said, there's just like no, they don't even have to speak. So that made my life a lot easier. Faden was very open as to what he wanted and what kind of light he wanted in the different spaces very early on also. So I think we figured that out very early on in prep, like what kind of lights we would have where. We worked very closely with his gaffer. We did light a lot of the sets because that's what we do now. But I just felt like this job was kind of seamless in the way it went about. We always had extra lights for him, and he if I had 10 lights, he would use 10 lights. If I had 20 lights, he would use all 20 of the lights. So it was one of the easier jobs.
You know what, just to echo that, I think like I'm used to so much anxiety nowadays when it comes to having enough practicals, because you're right, like DPs tend to really lean in to the practical elements in terms of lighting the sets, because the cameras are so sensitive that they don't really need to augment as much as they used to with film cameras. And this, for whatever reason, there was a very like comfortable dynamic between the gaffer and Regina, and Faden really leaned in to the choices that Regina made. And part of the reason is that we had conversations early in prep that we wanted the sets to feel naturalistic. So it was part of the approach that we wanted a very naturalistic feeling to the lighting and to these sets that felt like the practicals were doing all of the work in lighting the sets.
Well, one of my favorite sets in the film was the Folk City, or Gertie's, I think you guys call it, nightclub, where we first meet Joan Baez. It's such a rich and textured set. Can you talk a little bit about that set and all the wonderful details, such as the album covers on the walls? Again, so beautifully lit.
Well, this was also one of my favorite sets. The Gertie's is kind of an iconic location that no longer exists. It used to be in I think an Italian restaurant, and then they were falling on hard times, and they turned it into this folk venue. So there was like this layer of sort of Italian restaurant underneath the whole thing. And then on top of that, Regina layered in 200 photos of different acts, different folk acts, real folk faces, and 8x10 photographs on the wall, plus like all of the handbills of the shows, that had happened in the prior years. So there was a lot of layering in there.
We had research of Gertie's, and it had this string of, I guess, top folk albums from that time period. And we recreated that with anything that we can clear, and we hung all like the ribbons on it.
We had an amazing scenic department who came in and added this Havana-esque, like decayed plaster work that it was so sultry in there, and it photographed beautifully.
That room was also, that was shot in the Elks Lodge in Hoboken. And what Francois is not telling you is that he basically cut that a large room in half. And we had I mean, it was a build with inside of the location. And it made it a little bit more intimate. And the colors that were chosen were really, I love the sultry, hence the red and white tablecloths for the Italian restaurant. And we just tried to make it look as authentic as possible. And that night, watching like Joan Baez, Monica was Joan Baez that night, and Timmy was Bob. I mean, it was just, you got the chills like watching them sing in that setting.
Yeah, incredible. It's so intimate and so raw from both of them, and such a great setting for both of them. So well done. Francois, the Greystone Hospital was such a great location. Just wondering from both of you, what kind of renovations were done to that set? What did you guys do there?
Well, we moved into a school in Newark that was being used as storage for the school district. And so they had just lowered the heat down to like 39 degrees. It was freezing. And it was just full of boxes and storage. And we went in and covered up there were locker rooms that had to be covered up. And there were these beautiful long hallways that we felt would work being unadorned to make it feel like an institutional sort of space. And then the interior, where we find Woody Guthrie, was a complete build out of a larger space where we just basically kept the windows and then boxed in the rest of the room and we added a high tile walls and brought in a lot of detail to tell the story of this kind of sad place.
Like Francois said, the only thing I remember about Greystone was very cold working in there. I don't know if you ever get to see it, but we added a bathroom in there. We added a lot of, there's a lot of texture. We tried to create these kind of like steel coverings over the radiators that they had the actual Greystone. So there was some detail that we tried to add in to make it look just like the Greystone.
And again, we worked very closely with Faden and Jim to figure out the placement of the bed and how to make it look interesting and dynamic in the coverage of Woody in the bed, where we're just not looking into a boring wall. So there's this great like wire glass window that goes into a bathroom on one side with the light from the actual window, and then the other side there's a doorway going into the bathroom. And on the reverse, there's like another couple of beds with a patient in one of the beds. And we spent a lot of time on this. It looks simple, but there was a lot of thought that went into the space. Sometimes the simplest spaces are the hardest, because when you have a space that has like 5 beds and just like a handful of things, it becomes a reductive process of what's the perfect bed, what's the perfect side table, what's the perfect sconce. Regina found these great period sconces that we put on the walls right behind the patient's heads, and it created this really beautiful downlight kind of rim lighting Woody. And that was like an aha moment that helped inspire Faden a lot.
Yeah, well, the palette, the lighting, and the dressing for that set, so simple, but just so spot on. It's really, really lovely. Want to talk a little bit about the Viking Motel and of course, the Newport Folk Festival. Were you guys able to find a lot of archival footage for the festival, or how did you guys go about putting that set together?
So the Newport Folk Festival occurs twice in the movie. Once is 1964 and once is 1965. So we poured over as many research photos that we could find. In reality, they were actually both 2 different stages in 2 different parks, but they looked almost identical. So we made the choice to create one stage with subtle differences between 1964 and 1965. 99% of it was black and white. And a lot of it was from these. There's this documentary called Festival that's quite famous that was used. The footage was used in the Scorsese documentary. And then I think for me, it was less about capturing literally like elements from the documentary, but more about trying to evoke this feeling of this very like grassroots festival where you could go, anybody could go and spend $5 and see these great acts and sit on the lawn, and there was no corporate sponsorship. It was a unity and brotherhood in the crowd. And so Regina dressed these
T-shirts.
silkscreen t-shirts, and Broadside magazine was a folk magazine at the time, and those were like fully dressed. And the back of the stage was all handmade stuff. The whole set was made by hand, handcrafted, and I think that helped make it feel grounded as well, and made it feel like it was like a festival of the people.
We had all of the different tents made, the blue and white striped tents. They were shipped in from India. The chairs.
How many chairs, Regina? Were there like
Oh my
400
God.
chairs?
Where did you find all those chairs?
It started out as 400, then we ended up with like, I think 1,200 at the end.
They all had to look vintage and wooden. So
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened, but
They
it
were,
happened.
yeah, they were all authentic, like the old wooden fold-in chairs to match the research that they had there. The different fabric panels on the stage, that's all covered by set deck, and then they were painted by the art department. The lighting, the scaffolding rigs with the speakers on them, that was all us. I mean, we had a team up there for a couple of weeks that were just like prepping. A lot of the greens came in, that was all dirt before all the grass.
And the lighting was vintage. The lighting was period too. We working with their gaffer.
We built the speakers so that the sound department could put all of their equipment in them. I mean, a lot went into that. We made lighting towers to light up at night. And then backstage, we brought in a lot of equipment. We brought in the sound equipment from when they were taping. A lot went into that. String lights, garbage cans. I mean, it was a ton of work to make it look like and feel like a festival.
You know, it's always such a treat to see a film where you're never taken out of it. Everything just worked so well together. The lighting, the costuming, the production design. I know Ariana Phillips is such a force with her costume designs. You guys touched a little bit about this, but just wondering what the dialogue was for the color palette for the film and its characters.
Well, I shared a wall with Ariane, and we had mirror image offices in the middle of the art department. So it was like a wall, and then on one side it was like costume land with 5,000 costumes, and on the other side was art department land with the art department and set designers flowing into graphics and props and set decks. So we were like, it made us feel like we were kind of tied at the hip. And we both did our own lookbooks that were quite extensive and shared research. There were, thousands of images that we had in our research library. And I think that in the lookbook was quite extensive because I had 3 years to make it. And then that was, I think, a very helpful launching pad for Ariane. I would always share the color scheme with her and photos of the paint as it was going up, and the dressing as it was going in, to make sure that there was a synchronicity in the color choices that she was making with the characters. And it was very comfortable and very easy, actually, very, very easy. Because there was no like agendas. We're just open book sharing, and very, very collaborative and fun. I mean, Ariana is just such a pro. She's so great, and also just a wonderful artist and human to work with if you ever get a chance.
She's done some amazing work. Regina, would you like to talk about your team and who did what?
I had a really great team. I had Chuck Potter, like I said before, he was one of my assistants. He really took the reins at doing a lot of the exterior street scenes that we did. And he also did I think he did a fabulous job on the interior of the record store. That was like a labor of love for him because Chuck loves music so much, and I just let him run away with that. I had another great assistant, Amanda Finnegan, Kate Stewart, my coordinator, Ramsey Scott, my on-set dressers, Adam Goodenough, Cernice, my lead man, Jerry DeTita, and the rest of his set dressers. I had a really great team.
You had an amazing team.
Very fortunate.
And what was really great to see was just the amount of trust that Regina had in her team and her assistants, because, like she, having done this, I think a long time, Regina, like I could speak for you, like, that you can't do it all.
Yeah.
You can't be like in 20 places at the same time. So you really bring on people who you can trust to be your eyes and ears and your taste when you're not there. And then you can swoop in when you can swoop in. And, but there was a very trusting sort of family atmosphere that was really beautiful to watch.
Francois, you want to tell us a little bit about your team?
I had a wonderful small team led by Chris Morris, who was my supervising art director. And then, Chris had to wear a bunch of different hats because he was a supervising art director, but he was kind of like the only art director as well. In New York, the assistant art directors are actually draftsmen and set designers, and they don't, at least on this show, there was so much drafting to do that it was difficult to get out of the art department. So Chris and myself were like the faces on set for most of it and on stage. I had a really amazing concept illustrator named Christian Lana, who did 90% of the illustrations. There was another illustrator named Matthew Sara, who was great as well, who was on the first wave when we were trying to make the movie a year prior with a different crew. Our assistant art directors were Benjamin Cox, Rebecca Lord-Surratt, and Peter Dorsey, and they did an amazing job. And Rebecca ended up art directing the Newport Festival and the Viking Hotel down in Cape May, which is in southern New Jersey near Delaware. The graphics team, I can't not give them like high praise. We had a 4-person graphic design department, which is the largest graphics team that I've ever worked with. But just thousands and thousands and thousands of signs. Will Hopper, Carrie Mahoney, Ashley Waldron were the key graphic designers. And they went above and beyond because they would actually bake in a lot of the textures and the hand-painted brushstrokes into the files. So it would give our scenic department sort of a fighting chance, I guess, to get the sets done. Oftentimes we would add extra brushstrokes and aging on top of like hero signs, and many of the hero signs would be hand painted, but they still required punches and all that kind of stuff. But that was a huge effort to get all the graphics done, because when you go into a street scene, like literally everything has to be replaced. Street signs, business signs, stuff on the side of vehicles, trucks, vans. It just goes on and on and on and on.
But I would love to give a shout out, which I didn't, to Michael Jortner, our prop master, who, a lot of the set dressing and props it's a big crossover, and Michael and I work really well together. And, if it wasn't for him, a lot of this musical equipment would not have like come to life the way it did. So I just want to give him a big shout out and a thanks to everything he's contributed.
Michael's unbelievable, and he had a team full of musicians, musical lovers who knew. I don't know much about like guitars and instruments, so thank God the prop department knew what they were working with, and they had to keep everything tuned. And because they're also practical instruments, they had a whole team working on the instruments, and the microphones, like I said, were a big element. And all the vehicles in New York, the property master is in charge of all the vehicles, and he did 90% of all the vehicles in the movie. It's just like another massive effort. So big shout out to Michael. He was absolutely extraordinary.
Well, I just want to say a huge congratulations to you both. The film is just amazing, and it's such a great collaboration, and such an amazing final product. So remarkable work.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing it again.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.